In this video, we're going to see the craziest Transformer hybrid ever. What's up everyone, James here, and we return to ROM versus the Transformers Shining Armor. This is going to be the conclusion of this wild crossover. Make sure to hit that like button. If you didn't see the first video, there's a link right here, right below the like button, and there will be one at the end of this video. So remember, we left off with the Autobots interrupting the Decepticons and Dire Wraiths ambush on the Soulstar Order. Their goal was to wipe out the Order and steal the Energon synthesizer the Order created for Stardrive. Now we see how this alliance between the Decepticons, aka Starscream's brigade I guess we can call it, and this faction of Dire Wraiths led by Vectral came to be. We go to them meeting up weeks earlier before their ambush. Vectral is the one proposing this alliance, pointing out to Starscream they both started their wars with their mortal enemies because they were oppressed by them. However, Starscream makes it clear he could care less about a war between organics, and is prepared to kill them right now, until Vectral shows another thing they have in common is Dire Wraiths can change their form. He and his Dire Wraiths change into their more monstrous form, and Starscream is just unimpressed. He's like, oh wow, you're now spiky organics, whoop-de-doo. It's not until Vectral, using his dark magic, conjures a magical projection of his attack on Stardrive back on Mato Grasso, revealing to him that one of the Soulstar Order's Space Knights is a Cybertronian. This immediately intrigues Starscream, because he surmises, using his scientific mind, that the Order must have some device that generates Energon in order to keep Stardrive alive. So Starscream accepts Vectral's proposed alliance. Next we learn how the Autobots, Ultra Magnus and Bumblebee came to interrupt their ambush. Assuming weeks prior to the ambush, they were on a deep space patrol. They came across Decepticons attacking a Galactic Council warship and took them out. The cool and funny thing about Ultra Magnus that you'll notice throughout this story is that he's kind of jarheadish. He's all about shooting first and asking questions later. I will say though, this isn't the traditional Ultra Magnus you guys are familiar with. IDW's iteration of him is very unique and extraordinary. I will explain who he is because it will play a role in the ending of this series, but if you don't care to know, feel free to use the timestamps below to skip this part of the video. So in the IDW universe, Ultra Magnus is a mantle that's passed down. The original Ultra Magnus had died at some point in the early days of the Great War. One of Cybertron's lawmakers, Chief Justice Tyrest, instituted the Magnus Armor Program, an integrated suit of armor that would be piloted by a Transformer who's a 0.1%er. Now there are two different kinds of 0.1%ers. One kind are known as heavyweights, Cybertronians who are unusually strong and powerful. For example, Grimlock, Optimus Prime, and Megatron, just to name a few, are 0.1%ers who fall into that category. Another are load bearers, Transformers whose sparks can handle augmentations such as armor twice their size. These are the Transformers chosen to carry the mantle of Ultra Magnus. Who the current Ultra Magnus is will be revealed at the end of this series. While investigating the bodies of the Decepticons along with the Council warship, Magnus quickly figures out that the Decepticons were trying to destroy the remains of the Council ship and its crew in order to hide the attack was done by them. Seeing this as strange behavior for the Decepticons, Magnus hacks the ship's network and learns that it was heading for the planet Zetoxis. Now this takes us to where we last left off. ROM immediately attacks Magnus, believing he and Bumblebee are in league with Starscream and his crew, because remember, they've never encountered Cybertronians before, so they know nothing about the factions of Autobots and Decepticons. All they know is the reputation that Cybertronians seem to have in the universe, which is they're all genocidal mechanical monsters. But when Bumblebee comments that the Knights are fighting the Decepticons, that's when ROM realizes Magnus and Bumblebee aren't in league with the Cybertronians attacking them. However, remember I said Magnus is jarheadish. He immediately responds to ROM's attack by firing his giant cannon that blasts ROM back along with Stardrive and Starscream. Even when Bumblebee points out that maybe they should have figured out who's on whose side first before attacking, Magnus doesn't care to figure it out and just assumes that the Knights are working with the Decepticons. He says, we can analyze the bodies when we're done. So this ambush by the Decepticons and Dire Wraiths has become a chaotic battle with three sides fighting each other on the space station. As the battle is raging on, Skyblast and the Autobot shuttle outside the station informs Magnus the station is being ripped apart from the battle and is only being held together by its force field. Magnus isn't even worried about it, he's just enjoying the fighting. Bumblebee approaches Stardrive while she's down, mentioning she doesn't look like a Decepticon, and she just blasts him right in the chest, still believing he's with Starscream. Now this is where we see the first Dire Wraith transformer. Skyblast shows up on the station, firing at Stardrive after her attack on Bumblebee. Vectral orders one of his troops to take him. The Wraith infects Skyblast, taking control of his body and turning him into a true biomechanical monster. You're gonna see why this is one of the strongest versions of a transformer, because not only do the Space Knight's neutralizers that are designed to kill Wraiths don't affect this creature, but really no attacks phase this thing. Starscream, looking to make a getaway, orders Doomwing to come with him to grab the Energon synthesizer, but Doomwing gets grabbed and ripped apart by the Dire Wraith Skyblast. Starscream gets pissed with Vectral, telling him he isn't down for killing off his own soldiers. Vectral responds that the Dire Wraith or Skyblast doesn't control the abomination. They've become a mindless monster. That he only had an idea of what would happen if a Dire Wraith possessed a Cybertronian back when he attacked Stardrive. He says, now we know for sure what will happen. After all, sacrifices must be made in the pursuit of knowledge and power. Now, Bumblebee attempts to talk to Stardrive again, believing she's a Decepticon. He questions her on why she's a Decepticon dressed as a knight, and Stardrive just responds, again, by blasting him in the chest. You think B would learn. Now, Ultra Magnus, yet again, displays how he shoots first and asks questions later. He tells Bumblebee he has deactivated the station's force field, and that it'll break apart in a second, destroying the monster and anybody else around it. While the station is beginning to get ripped apart, Magnus and Bumblebee head for their shuttle, and Bumblebee mentions to Magnus that he doesn't think Stardrive is a Decepticon, and Magnus responds that he doesn't care. ROM tells Stardrive to get off the station with him and the other knights. At the same time, Bumblebee offers her a ride, but she's not listening to either of them, because she's in shock, worrying about the station's crew dying. Starscream takes advantage of the Autobots distracted and destroys their shuttle. So now, they're screwed. The Dire Wraith Skyblast attacks the Knights. The station begins to enter Zetoxis' atmosphere, continuing to be torn apart. The Decepticons and Dire Wraiths make their escape without the Energon synthesizer, because Starscream just plans on digging it out of the rubble of whatever's left of the station that crashes on the planet. ROM orders all the Knights to flee while they can. This is where we see Stardrive is a triple changer. She transforms into a jet and saves Bumblebee and Magnus, since she notices they have no way of escaping the station. The station ends up exploding, and ROM and the Knights escape. ROM asks the Knights if Stardrive survived, and Livia, the ever-so-sweet Knight, responds the machine survived, that Stardrive picked her kind over them, but ROM tells her not to jump to conclusions. Meanwhile, as they're arriving on Zetoxis, Vectral informs Starscream that the Dire Wraith Skyblast is still alive, and that it is as resilient as it is mad. After Stardrive and the Autobots crash land on Zetoxis, Magnus tries to go full-on Judge Dredd on Stardrive, telling her she's under arrest for providing her services to an organic race, which violates the Tyrest Accord. Now, the Tyrest Accord is not essential to the story, but it's an accord drafted by Chief Justice Tyrest, created to govern the control of Transformers technology, forbidding it from passing into the hands of alien species. It eventually evolved into a military law. The Transformers who become Ultra Magnus are the deputized enforcers of the Accord. So basically a space cop. Now, Stardrive becomes saddened by this because she mentions the Knights hate her and have already told her she doesn't belong. Now when she meets fellow Cybertronians, of course she would be treated in a similar way. She tells Magnus she won't resist, but first wants his help in looking for her fellow Space Knights. Bumblebee points out to Magnus that she did save them and that they're stuck on this planet anyways until help comes, so they might as well help her find her friends. Ultra Magnus gives kind of a a-hole response. He tells them both that they're being, quote, soft-headed poppet valves, whatever that means. That her friends are organics who barely count as life, and are most likely dead since they're a frail species. Suddenly though, he gets put down, taking a blast from ROM. ROM says, "I've never been accused of being frail, but this is a day of firsts. Surrender, yellow Cybertronian, or join your ally." It initially seems like Magnus is down for the count, but ROM is shocked to see he survived the attack. The one thing I want to point out here that the issues of this series do that I like so much is each issue gives you a different character's perspective. In the last video, it was from Stardrive's. At the beginning of this video, it was Bumblebee's, and currently, it's ROM's. In his inner monologue, he mentions that it's been less than an hour since the Cybertronians arrived, and not only have thousands perished in the destruction of the station, but they also killed Cadet Oxen. And now, he believes Magnus and Bumblebee have taken Stardrive hostage. A fight breaks out between both groups. Cadet Sada attacks Bumblebee, and ROM and Livia take on Magnus. Even though Magnus is a jarhead a-hole in this series, I still like him a lot. He absorbs ROM and Livia's attack, and is like, "That's the best you got? You chrome-plated meatbags?" Stardrive is the one who brings an end to this fight when she yells at ROM, Livia, and Sada to quit it. She explains that she isn't their prisoner and saved them because they needed help. An argument breaks out between her and the Space Knights. ROM tries to say that they're dangerous, but Stardrive responds that, contrary to what the Soulstar Order has taught her all her life, not all Cybertronians are monsters. She accuses ROM and the Order of lying to her, but ROM points out that everything the Cybertronians have done so far proves everything she was taught was true about them. Bumblebee explains that the Decepticons are responsible for everything that happened, and ROM doesn't understand. This is when Ultra Magnus realizes that since the planets in the Soulstar Order are global societies, each achieving unified world peace before developing space travel, the Space Knights have never seen a species at war with each other. So that's why they failed to consider there were factions regarding Cybertronians. Ultra Magnus gives them the whole 411 on how the same species can end up at war with each other. And I absolutely love what he says because it perfectly explains how we end up at war with each other. He says, "Sometimes beings of the same species disagree so strongly that they become strong enemies. The hatreds within a species go deeper than any from without. Our enemies are called the Decepticons. We are the Autobots, and we are all Cybertronians." The Space Knights, now fully understanding the distinction between the Autobots and Decepticons, no longer consider Magnus and Bumblebee enemies. However, Livia still blames them for the remains of the Orchid Station that is currently crash landing on Zetoxis, and the Wraiths that are on the planet, which means the planet will become infected, which also means, according to her, the world must be raised now. Remember, this is her go-to answer when it comes to the Dire Wraiths infection. She proposed the same action plan for the mining colony in the last video. Bumblebee is like, "You can't be serious, the planet is inhabited." And Magnus just doesn't care as usual. He's just like, "I can see her logic." Stardrive gets pissed and says they can handle the Wraiths, but ROM disagrees, because though under normal circumstances, he believes they could handle all the Dire Wraiths before the infection became terminal. However, the prospect of more Cybertronian Wraith hybrids is troubling. Bumblebee asks why they think the Decepticons and Wraiths are here, and this is when he and Magnus learn all about the Energon synthesizer from Stardrive. Ultra Magnus, hearing this, recognizes the huge importance of the synthesizer. He says, "The lack of Energon is the only thing keeping the Decepticons in check. If they had a way to make their own, they'd defeat us in weeks, and I doubt they'd stop with conquering Cybertron." Their discussion comes to an end once the remains of the station crash on the planet. Stardrive suggests they fly to it immediately in order to get the synthesizer. But Ultra Magnus and Bumblebee reveal to her that they're not triple changers like her. They don't have a flying mode. So ROM orders that the flyers will fly ahead to the site, while Cadet Sada stays and travels with the Autobots on the ground. Meanwhile, somewhere on the planet, the Dire Wraith Skyblast has landed and is massacring the Zetoxians. Also, he's mutated even more and become bigger and more monstrous. Watching from a distance, Starscream and Vectral examine the hybrid. Vectral points out its mutation factor is increasing, that it looks exquisite but painful. At that moment, the monster screams in agony and is burning from the inside out. It eventually combusts and bursts into flames. All that's left is its smoking corpse. Vectral, wanting to create a successful hybrid, wonders if the Zictoxians are mechanical, thinking maybe a mechanoid closer to the scale of a Dire Wraith would create a more stable hybrid. What's funny here is Starscream grabs one of the Zictoxians to check and see if they are, and when he sees they're organic, he straight up tosses the Zictoxian here that he grabbed and says, "Nope, fleshling, hairy too, yuck." Now, Vectral asks Starscream to allow him to take over one of his troops. Even though Starscream is a psychopath, he makes it clear that he isn't giving up one of his own. Later, ROM, Livia, and Stardrive arrive at the crash site and see some Zictoxians scavenging the station's remains. The Decepticons arrive at the same time, and a firefight breaks out. Livia tries to order Stardrive to engage them from above, but she refuses, wanting to protect and evacuate the Zictoxians in the vicinity first. She evacuates them, but ends up in a firefight with Starscream. He's just questioning how she thinks she can go head to head with him. He says, "I've been fighting for 4 million years. Don't jockey around like an amateur." He fires on her hull, damaging her and killing the Zictoxians she tried to save. Starscream then takes on Livia and ROM, and this perfectly displays that Space Knights have a hard time fighting with a seasoned Transformer warrior like Starscream. He smashes ROM, stomping him into the ground. Livia uses her neutralizers on him, but does not significantly damage him. The only advantage they have is speed and size. And I only say size because since they are so much smaller than a Transformer, that makes them a smaller target. ROM manages to land an uppercut on Starscream. Now, as that fight is going on, elsewhere on the planet, Bumblebee, Ultra Magnus, and Sada made a stop on their way to the crash site to help some Zictoxians here. Bumblebee is using his laser torch to heat up some rubble in order to provide them with warmth, because he didn't want to leave these people out in the cold. Apparently, Zitoxis is a cold, energy deficient world. We can safely assume this planet is under the Order's protection since it was their station that was in the planet's orbit. This shows us that maybe not every world under the Soulstar Order's protection is getting the help from them that truly matters, like resources such as food, energy, water, and advanced tech. However, Bumblebee's good deed is all for nothing, because this was all a trap. The Zitoxians they were helping are infected. They're all Dire Wraiths. Vectral, on top of Astro Train, bursts out of a hiding spot, launching their attack. Bumblebee begins to get possessed, but luckily, Ultra Magnus smokes the Dire Wraiths that were attacking him. Sada fights Vectral, and he easily beats her back. Remember, she's a cadet, so she doesn't have experience going up against high-ranking Dire Wraiths like him. Noticing more Dire Wraiths with Astro Train charging towards them, Magnus unleashes heavy power on them, buying himself enough time to order Bumblebee to take Sada and stop Starscream from getting the synthesizer while he covers them. Knowing what's at stake if Starscream gets the synthesizer, B takes Sada and leaves. After he leaves, Ultra Magnus says, "I got this. Come at me, Wraiths. There are a few articles of the Tyrest Accord I want to explain to you." Returning to the crash site, as ROM and Livia are battling the Seekers, Stardrive is ignoring ROM's comm calls because she's mourning the death of the Zitoxians she tried to save. This is another reason why I say Stardrive is a true knight. She lives by a white knight's code, protecting the weak, upholding justice, having honor and integrity, etc. All the while wearing her heart on her sleeve. She feels these losses deeply. She lives by it so much that when Starscream sneaks up on her, she initially threatens to destroy the synthesizer, but offers it to him if he leaves the planet with every Dire Wraith. That way, no more Zitoxians die. Returning to Ultra Magnus, he's literally bringing the heat to the Dire Wraiths. He's facing down wave after wave of Vectral's Dire Wraiths charging towards him, smashing and tearing them apart and talking trash at the same time. Despite his best efforts though, he gets overwhelmed by the Dire Wraiths. They wrap their bodies around him and end up subduing him. Vectral says to him, "I have examined the body. I understand what it means to possess a Cybertronian. It means I can control the process. Believe me, this will hurt you more than it will hurt me." Vectral begins to possess Ultra Magnus. As Rom and Livia are battling Dirge and Ramjet, Starscream and Stardrive come to an agreement, and in true Starscream fashion, he gets greedy. He attempts again to bring Stardrive into the Decepticons. He tells her that the Decepticons are all about equality, but when she brings up the fact that he allied with the Dire Wraiths, who are evil, he goes right into his famous manipulation tactics. If Starscream is the GOAT at anything, it's manipulation. He gives her this whole BS sob story of how he just met the Dire Wraiths and allied with them because they have so much in common. But when he saw the mutated Skyblast die screaming in agony, he never thought that was something the Wraiths could do to Cybertronians. So now he is ashamed of allying with them and terrified at what they can do. Before Stardrive can give him an answer on whether she'll join or not, their conversation gets interrupted by Dirge's body slamming right into Starscream. Livia gets the drop on Starscream. She and Rom overwhelm him with blaster fire, and he uses Dirge's body as a shield and retreats. Now, Livia's idea of raising the planet earlier was ultimately rejected by Rom. However, she comes up with another plan involving the Energon synthesizer. Through the discussion, we learned that if they were to destroy the synthesizer, it would unleash an explosion that would eradicate half of life on the planet. Which is why after hearing that, Rom is reluctant to do it. Livia argues it would preserve the other half of the planet still uninfected by the Wraiths. That if they aren't going to raise the planet, this is the best and only alternative. This angers Stardrive because what Livia wants to do is what her and the Order say Cybertronians do. Rom tries to calm her down by telling her they're just considering options, not calling into question her people's character. This further angers Stardrive because, as she puts it, until this morning, they were her people. So she decides to leave and take the synthesizer with her. Rom tries to tell her all she is doing is making herself an easy target for the Decepticons, but Stardrive doesn't care. She tells him she knows they won't destroy it, and if he wants it, he has to take it from her. She transforms and flies away, but Livia immediately shoots her down, and a fight that's been a long time coming happens. Stardrive versus Livia. Even Stardrive knows this was bound to happen one day. She says, "You've been waiting a long time to take that shot. I hope it was worth it." She transforms into her car mode and charges toward her. Livia tries to order her to stop being insubordinate, and Stardrive responds, "I don't take orders from you anymore." Livia says, "To think I stood up for you," which is crazy to me because she's been a specious, I guess you would call it, someone who hates other species. Even if that's not the case, she's just been a dick. Stardrive rams her right through the station debris here and sends her flying, while yelling, "Nobody ever stood up for me, ever." She puts Livia down, and when Livia says, "You'll regret that, Cybertronian," Stardrive gives her a cold reply. She says, "I have a feeling I'm going to regret a lot, but not that." At that moment, Bumblebee and Sada arrive attacking her, initially thinking a Wraith is possessing her, but when they see that's not the case, Sada at least assumes Stardrive has joined the Decepticons. She lands a blow on Stardrive, but all it does is piss her off. She grips Sada, switches into her battle mode, and delivers a badass line. She says, "Don't make me fight you. You won't win." As this Stardrive versus everyone fight is going down, above them in the sky is Starscream and the Seekers watching them. Ramjet asks Starscream why they aren't attacking them, and Starscream answers, "Let them fight it out, and we'll collect whatever is left once they're done." Eventually, Stardrive does stop fighting everyone when Bumblebee informs her of the Wraith ambush and how Ultra Magnus sacrificed himself to give them all a chance to stop the Decepticons and Wraiths. It's yet another loss in this whole situation that Stardrive ends up feeling deeply. She lists out everyone who's lost their lives so far. The Soulstar agents on the space station, Cadet Oxen, the Zetoxians here on the planet, and now Ultra Magnus. She admits that maybe she shouldn't have tried to run with the synthesizer, but makes it clear that Livia's way isn't the only way. That if everyone agrees to let nobody else die in vain, she's with them. Starscream gets disappointed when he sees they've all stopped fighting, but he still isn't going to attack them while they're distracted. He's waiting until Vectrol's promised Dire Wraith backup arrives. Suddenly, a silhouette on the horizon catches his attention in the sky and Bumblebee's on the ground. And B is all excited because it's obviously Ultra Magnus. He's like, "Magnus, I knew you'd be alive. Those Wraiths didn't stand a chance." Oh B, how wrong you are. Once Magnus reaches them, Bumblebee and everyone else are all horrified at what they see. Ultra Magnus has become a Dire Wraith transformer, fused with Vectrol, who has perfected the fusion of the two species. He immediately opens fire on them. This is already a bad situation for them, but guess what? It gets a lot worse for them. When Stardrive tells the Zetoxians here to leave because they're in the line of fire, one of them replies, "Correction, Knight, you are." All the Zetoxians here reveal themselves to be Dire Wraiths. They swarm her. It's nuts. Bumblebee tries to speak to Ultra Magnus, thinking he can break the possession from within, but Vectrol shuts that down by blasting him. ROM saves Stardrive, but she and the rest of the group are not out of the woods. They're surrounded. Vectrol laughs and says, "Welcome to your death and the birth of a new universal order. I understand how to possess your kind, and combined with Cybertronian bodies, the power of Wraith magic is limitless. We shall use Cybertronians to extend our empire and conquer the Galactic Council and Soulstar Order space." Now Starscream gloats and adds to that, saying the Wraiths will take over the Autobots and pillage, while the Decepticons will use the Energon synthesizer to take over Cybertron. Then we'll figure out who gets what in the rest of the galaxy later. Now you'd think Starscream of all the Transformers would smell a double cross coming. Vectrol grips him by the throat, while the army of Dire Wraiths swarm the rest of the Decepticons. He says, "You are a means to an end, Starscream, no more than the Autobot I inhabit." One of the things we see here is that Ultra Magnus is still conscious of himself and sees everything Vectrol is doing. It's hard for him to fight Vectrol's possession though, when deep down he knows Starscream deserves this. While Vectrol is distracted, ROM immediately strikes. And this is where we see why this version of a Transformer is the craziest and one of the strongest versions. ROM's neutralizer damaged Vectrol, but he instantly heals himself using science and magic. Stardrive, seeing this, does something totally unique and displays how quickly she can think on her feet during a fight. She grabs Sada, tells her to extend her neutralizer energy blades to their fullest, and uses her body as a sword. She slices off Vectrol's arm, freeing Starscream. This damage to Vectrol allows Magnus to fight back against his possession. Bumblebee and Livia help out the Decepticons. An interesting thing that happens is ROM, while battling Vectrol, says that his neutralizer is no longer affecting him. So in essence, Vectrol has evolved to the point in a very short time that a neutralizer no longer hurts him. Once the Decepticons destroyed the Wraiths they were fighting, Starscream informs them they're grabbing the synthesizer and getting off the planet. Stardrive notices them leaving the battle and chases after them. Vectrol grabs Bumblebee, and B continues to try to talk to Ultra Magnus, still hoping he can break free from the possession. He says, "Magnus, we've been on a lot of missions together, buddy. I believe in you." Ultra Magnus, hearing B's voice while battling Vectrol's possession, says, "Hear that? He thinks I can beat you." Vectrol, gloating, replies, "I know your kind inside and out. There is something unusual about you Cybertronians, but nothing I cannot conquer." That's when Magnus remembers he is unusual. His spark is unique. He remembers he's a 0.1%er, chosen to carry the mantle of Ultra Magnus. He slams Vectrol's spirit and says Here's one thing you don't know. How an Ultra Magnus is built. I'm not like other Cybertronians. And I'm not just worthy of the badge. The badge makes me what I am. He breaks free from Vectro's possession just long enough for ROM to fire his neutralizer at his chest. Bumblebee tries to plead to ROM to stop because he's firing at Magnus' spark. He says if you keep shooting, you'll kill Magnus along with the Wraith. There has to be another way. ROM replies, I wish there was. He unleashes the full power of his neutralizer and kills Ultra Magnus. Now Stardrive reaches Starscream as he attempts to steal the Energon synthesizer. He tries yet again to get her to join him, but when she refuses, he blasts her with his null ray. He then ends up having her dead to rights. Luckily for her, Livia saves her. Stardrive then proceeds to give Starscream a major beatdown. It's similar to the beatdown Soundwave gave him recently in the Energon universe. She gives him a German suplex, smashes his face, and rips off one of his wings. However, before she can finish him off, he gets saved by his fellow Seekers, and Starscream realizes he isn't leaving with the synthesizer. So if he can't get it, nobody can. He destroys the synthesizer. Despite everything he has done so far, Stardrive is still shocked that Starscream committed such a monstrous act. He has threatened the lives of millions. Before the capacitors explode, she attempts to power them down, but Livia stops her. She argues that the Zetoxians here are hopelessly infected. They're already dead. She can't risk her life to save them. She needs to be alive to prevent this tragedy from ever happening again. That this is the cost of war. As that goes on, Bumblebee and the Knights look over Magnus's body. ROM notices the body within the armor and asks B about him. Bumblebee says Ultra Magnus wasn't his name, it was his job. Whenever an Ultra Magnus falls in battle, the armor returns to Cybertron and somebody new takes over. His real name was Convoy. ROM apologizes and Sada points out to them that Vectro is still alive and crawling towards the explosion she just noticed, which intensifies as Stardrive tries to stop it. Vectro tries to attack her, but the explosion builds and expands, consuming everything. Stardrive transforms into her jet mode and outraces the blast, with Livia on one of her wings and Vectro on the other. He says, remember Cybertronian Knight, you did this. Your kind, both of you. He ends up falling off the wing and gets consumed by the explosion. As the explosion reaches its pinnacle, covering half the planet, Stardrive says in her inner monologue, not every Zetoxian in this hemisphere had been infected by the Wraiths, but the blast did not discriminate between the guilty and the innocent. Later in space, the explosion continues to decimate half the planet. Livia justifies the death of the Zetoxians here, explaining that this was the only option to save the uninfected. ROM begrudgingly agrees, but he tells her this is still a failure. If this is the outcome every time they try to save a planet, they will be no better than the Dire Wraiths. Bumblebee sees Stardrive saddened by all this, and assures her he didn't want this to happen. Stardrive responds to all of them, saying Cybertronians and Knights fight without regard for the people they're trying to save. We all put our prejudices and concerns over the good of the civilians we all should be defending. I'm done with it. ROM mentions that he feels the same way, but she can't leave the Soul Star Order because the armor cannot be shed. Which, for organics, that is true. But Stardrive reminds him she's Cybertronian. She says, I shouldn't have to remind you, ROM. I'm not one of you. She strips off the armor and gives it to him. ROM says, Stardrive, I know not what to say. Stardrive replies, it's fine, ROM. There isn't anything to say. She flies away and disappears among the stars. Bumblebee tells ROM that Stardrive was right. His entire team died and the Autobots are exactly what the galaxy says they are. When ROM offers him a ride home, B refuses because the Magnus armor has a recall switch, and somebody will pick him up soon. ROM's last words to him are, then this is goodbye forever, Cybertronian. For the good of the universe, may our kind never meet again. Now from here we go to quite a few epilogues. First up, Starscream returns to the Decepticons, and I love the look of the Decepticon base here. Starscream reports to Megatron of the failure of an alliance being formed with the Dire Wraiths, saying that they're far too treacherous a race to ally with, and as usual, Megatron is angry with him. Second, we go to this planet where the Dire Wraiths reside. Through a magical projection, they see the events of the whole ordeal as a Toxis. And I guess this is the Wraiths leader here, who deems Vectral's pride in science a disaster. He tells all the Wraiths they must rely on their sacred magic, and not the blasphemous abomination of technology. Third, Bumblebee returns home to the Autobots, reporting to Optimus Prime about everything that happened. Optimus informs him that Convoy's predecessor, whose name is Blockus, will reclaim the mantle of Ultra Magnus. What's interesting is Bumblebee says to himself that he didn't tell Optimus or anyone else about the synthesizer, because if any Cybertronians knew about it, they would prove the Soulstar Order was right about them. Now we don't get confirmation on whether or not Starscream told Megatron about the synthesizer. It's possible that he didn't, since that would make his mission an even bigger failure. Fourth, we go to the Soulstar Order, as they speak to the Galactic Council. Both sides renew their beef and decide not to ally and stay in their parts of space. At the same time, ROM feels troubled by this decision. He watches Livia and Sada speak to new space cadets, which only makes him feel worse, especially when the cadets are told that once they become knights, their identity is erased, and the knight is all that remains. The fifth and final epilogue is with Stardrive somewhere in the galaxy on a planet seemingly untouched. She has this amazing monologue. She says, "They were right about me. The organics, the machines, they knew who I was. I was born into death and destruction, and war became my life. They decided who I was, so their decision shaped me. But no more. I am me, Stardrive, not who they see me as, not who they think I am, but who I choose to be. And the day I realized I can be more than Cybertronian, more than a Soulstar Knight, was the day I was reborn." The series ends with Stardrive infected. That's the end of the video. Next up in our journey in the IDW Universe timeline, we will finally cover the Transformers' arrival on Earth in Transformers Infiltration. I also will be covering more of the Transformers spotlights. Cliffjumper is the next one up. I hope you all enjoyed this series, enjoyed the video. Thank you so much for watching. Please hit that like button, comment below your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel. Other than that, have an awesome day, and always remember every day to go beyond.